The heat in the Amazon isn't just a temperature. It's a physical weight. It sits on your chest, heavy and wet, like a second skin you can't peel off. For most men, this suffocating humidity would be hell on earth. But for Captain Marcus, it was just a different kind of pressure than what he'd felt for 20 years in the mountains of Afghanistan or the kill houses of Virginia. At least here, the pressure came from the sun, not from the anticipation of a sniper's bullet tearing through the air. Marcus sat at the bow of the small aluminum skiff, its battered hull slamming against the dark water. He wasn't looking at the majestic green walls of the forest on either bank. His eyes, deep-set and restless, scanned the tree line. Old habits die hard. He wasn't looking for beauty. He was scanning for movement. He was looking for threats. By his side, sitting with the rigid posture of a soldier on duty, was Max. The sable German shepherd, dark as a shadow, didn't look like a pet enjoying a boat ride. His ears, one with a notch missing from the tip, a souvenir from an IED blast in Fallujah, swiveled like radar dishes, picking up sounds the roaring engine hid from human ears. Max wasn't panting from the heat. He was focused. He was working. The boat pilot, a local man with sun-leathered skin and fearful eyes, throttled down abruptly. The engine sputtered and died, leaving only the sound of water lapping against the metal. The pilot pointed to a clearing on the left bank, where the jungle was trying to swallow the remains of a wooden structure. "This is it," the man said in broken English, avoiding Marcus's gaze. "The land of the 1497. Marcus didn't reply. He tossed his tactical duffel bag onto the muddy bank. The weight of his combat boots sank into the black sludge as he jumped off. Max followed instantly, ignoring the water, positioning himself between the jungle and his handler. The dog favored his right rear leg slightly upon landing, but corrected his stance in less than a second. Pain is information, not a stopper. The pilot didn't wait. Before Marcus could even turn around, the engine roared back to life, and the skiff peeled away, heading back downstream with a speed that felt unnatural. The man was fleeing. Not from Marcus, but from the place itself. Marcus stood still, listening until the engine noise faded into the deafening buzz of the cicadas. He reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. The deed to the land. The negotiation had been fast, almost desperate. The previous owner, a man with deep, dark circles under his eyes and shaking hands, had accepted the first offer. But there was one strange condition. The price on the paperwork had to be exact. Not $1,500. Not $1,400. It had to be $1,497. $1,497. Numerology, the man had stammered, wiping cold sweat from his forehead. Marcus didn't believe in numerology. He believed in fear, and that man was terrified. He pocketed the paper and looked at his new home. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a ruin. The shack was a classic stilt house raised above the mud to escape the seasonal floods. But time and rot had been cruel. The tin roof was twisted like a broken spine. The wooden walls, swollen from the constant rain, had gaps wide enough to fit an arm through. Vines choked the support pilings like constrictor snakes trying to crush the house. Marcus walked to the base of the structure. His right hand, calloused and scarred, touched one of the main pilings. The wood was damp and smelled of sweet decay. He felt a slight tremor in his fingers, not in the wood, but in his own hand. The neurological tremor, the parting gift from his time in the teams. A constant reminder that his nervous system was still stuck in a firefight that ended 2 years ago. He clenched his fist until the shaking stopped. He took a deep breath of the heavy jungle air. Max approached and pressed his warm flank against Marcus's leg. The dog knew. He always knew when the electricity in his handler's body changed. That touch was the anchor. We are here. The ground is solid. No visible bogeys. "Let's clear the perimeter, buddy," Marcus whispered. His voice sounded rusty from disuse. They climbed the rotting stairs, testing each step. Inside, the shack was an oven. The air was stagnant, thick with dust and the smell of animals that had nested there. Bats shifted in the dark ceiling. The floorboards creaked as if protesting the invasion. Marcus dropped his bag in the corner that looked structurally sound. He didn't see the filth. He saw lines of fire. North window, view of the river. South window, view blocked by dense jungle, a dangerous blind spot. Front door, flimsy wood, needs reinforcement. He spent the next few hours working, not to make the place pretty, but to make it livable. With his machete, he cleared the brush invading the porch. With paracord and a tarp from his bag, he patched the biggest hole in the roof. The manual labor was therapeutic. The physical exertion forced his mind to focus on the now. Cut, tie, hammer. While his muscles burned, he didn't think about the screams over the comms, the blood on the sand, or the silence of the empty house back in the States. But the Amazon takes no prisoners. The sun dropped fast, like someone flipped a switch. Darkness in the jungle is absolute. There are no city lights reflecting off the clouds. It is a solid, impenetrable black. And with the darkness came the sound. The forest, which seemed static by day, woke up. Howler monkeys screamed like jaguars. Insects buzzed at frequencies that felt like drills in the teeth. Branches snapped for no apparent reason. Marcus sat on the floor of the shack, his back against the wall, a tactical flashlight off in his hand, his machete by his side. He tried to close his eyes, to force the sleep that had evaded him for months, but his body was at condition red. Every snap outside was a footstep. Every shadow was a breach. Max was lying near the door, blocking the entrance. But the dog wasn't sleeping. His ears were up, rotating independently. And then Marcus noticed it. Max wasn't listening to the jungle outside. The dog had lifted his head and was staring intently at the floor, at the old wooden floorboards, right in the center of the room. Max let out a low sound, a vibration that Marcus felt in the wood before he heard it. It wasn't an attack growl. It was a query. The dog stood up, nails clicking on the wood. He circled a specific plank, sniffing the gaps with an obsessive intensity. He scratched the wood once, twice. Then he looked at Marcus, his amber eyes glowing in the gloom, demanding an explanation. Marcus clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dust and illuminated the center of the room. There was nothing there, just old, dirty, stained wood. "It's just a rat, Max. Leave it." But Max didn't leave it. He laid down exactly on top of that spot, nose pressed into the crack, and froze. The former combat dog, trained to ignore distractions and focus on the mission, was telling his captain that the mission wasn't out there in the bush. The mission was underneath them. Marcus killed the light, but his hand stayed on the handle of his machete. 1297. The terrified pilot. The house nobody wanted. And now, his dog obsessed with the floor. The first night in the jungle didn't bring peace. It brought the certainty that the silence he bought wasn't empty. Dawn in the jungle doesn't bring silence. It brings a changing of the guard. The night predators retreat into the shadows, and the day shift. A deafening orchestra of birds and insects takes over. For Captain Marcus, the sunlight revealed the true extent of his problem. By night, the shack looked old. By day, it looked like a corpse in advanced decomposition. He took the last sip of black coffee, brewed on a portable camp stove he'd humped in his ruck, and felt the caffeine hit his bloodstream. The tremor in his right hand was lighter today. Physical labor would be the medicine. He hadn't come here to rest. He came here to work, to exhaust his body until his mind stopped projecting images of that alleyway in Fallujah. Marcus stepped down onto the muddy ground. He didn't look at the overgrown yard like a gardener. He looked at it like a combat engineer preparing a defensive position. First step, the perimeter. The tall grass surrounding the stilt house wasn't just ugly. It was a tactical nightmare. It hid snakes, jaguars, and worse, men. Machete in hand, Marcus began to clear a kill zone, a clear field of fire around the base of the house where any approach would be visible. He swung the blade with rhythmic precision. Slash, step, slash, step. Sweat soaked his olive-drab t-shirt in minutes, mixing with dirt and dead bugs. While Marcus waged war on the vegetation, Max had his own mission. The German Shepherd wasn't interested in sticks or squirrels. He patrolled the area underneath the house, weaving between the support pilings like a gray ghost. Every few minutes, he would stop at the same central piling, a thick log of hardwood blackened by moisture, and sniff the base. He would let out a high-pitched whine, a sound of frustration, and look at Marcus. Marcus ignored him the first 5 times. On the 6th, he stopped, wiping sweat from his brow with a dirty hand. "Nothing there, Max. Focus." The dog obeyed the voice command, sitting immediately, but his amber eyes didn't leave the wood. Max knew his handler was wrong, but his discipline held him back. For now. Hours passed, and the sun hit its peak. Marcus climbed onto the roof. The tin sheets burned to the touch. He used baling wire and pieces of plastic tarp to seal the larger holes. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. He improvised gutters using split bamboo he found in the bush, rigging a system to catch rainwater and funnel it into an old blue plastic drum he found on the property. Water was life. And in Marcus's paranoid mind, relying on the river, which could be poisoned or watched, was a risk he wouldn't take. By the end of the 3rd day, supplies were running low. The rice and jerky he brought were almost gone. He needed nails, fuel for the small generator, and food. That meant breaking his isolation. That meant going to the village. Marcus called Max to the boat. The dog leaped into the aluminum skiff without hesitation, taking his watch position at the bow. Marcus pulled the cord on the outboard motor. It coughed blue smoke and roared to life. They ran upriver for 40 minutes until they spotted the floating houses of the São Gabriel community. The village was a cluster of colorful wooden shacks, some balanced on massive logs, others clinging to the riverbanks. There was a church, a dirt soccer field, and the trade, a general store that sold everything from fish hooks to cheap liquor. When Marcus docked the boat, the atmosphere shifted. Kids playing in the water stopped and stared. 2 men repairing a fishing net lowered their hands, watching with guarded expressions. It wasn't curiosity, it was caution. In this region, outsiders usually meant trouble. It was either the police, environmental enforcement, or people on the run. And Marcus, with his military bearing, the scar on his neck, and a dog that looked like a wolf, screamed, "Trouble." He tied off the boat and walked to the store, Max glued to his left leg in a perfect heel. The dog didn't growl, but his body was rigid, tail still, scanning for any sudden movement from the locals. Inside the store, the smell of dried fish and kerosene was thick. An old fan buzzed overhead. Behind the counter, an old man with skin like crumpled leather and milky, cataract-clouded eyes was wiping the counter with a filthy rag. Marcus placed his items on the wood. A bag of rice, beans, cans of oil, a box of nails, and 12-gauge shotgun shells. He had found an old, rusty pump-action shotgun in the house that was salvageable. The old man tallied the items on a piece of paper, moving slowly. "Moving into the hole, are you?" the old man asked, not looking up. His voice was dry, like crushed leaves. Marcus hesitated. The hole must be the local nickname for his shack. I bought the land, Marcus replied, keeping it short. The old man stopped writing. He looked up, locking eyes with Marcus. Nobody buys that land, son. We just occupy it until they ask for it back. Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, that instinctual warning that a conversation had turned into an interrogation. Who are they? Marcus asked, keeping his voice neutral. The old man didn't answer the question. He pushed the supplies toward Marcus and took the cash. Then he leaned over the counter, lowering his voice, even though the shop was empty. The guy before you, the foreigner, he thought he could see everything. He wrote down times. He took pictures. The old man shook his head. The river has owners, son. Owners who don't like lights on. Marcus pocketed his change, analyzing the old man. This wasn't a local trying to scare him with ghost stories. This was a practical survival warning. What kind of owners? Gold miners? The old man laughed, a sound devoid of humor, almost a cough. Miners make noise, muddy the water, drink rum. Not these ones. These ones pass at night, with engines that hum soft. Expensive engines. They pass on the new moon. The old man looked at Max, then back to Marcus. If you want to last longer than the foreigner, when you hear the motor on the river bend, you kill the lantern. You hold the dog, and you don't look, because if they see you looking, they stop. And if they stop... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The message was delivered with the clarity of a death sentence. Marcus grabbed his bags. He didn't say thanks, just nodded, a code between men who understand danger. He walked out into the bright sun, but he felt a chill in his gut that the temperature couldn't explain. The ride back was silent. Marcus looked at the riverbanks with different eyes now. The green beauty hid supply routes. The river bends hid logistical secrets. He knew from his time in special ops that organized crime runs with corporate efficiency. If there were expensive engines running at night, there was a smuggling route, and his shack, purchased for exactly 1,197, was strategically positioned right on a waypoint. By the time they reached the shack, the sun was setting, painting the sky a bruised purple. The house looked different now. It wasn't just a ruin to fix. It was an observation post, or a target. Marcus unloaded the supplies. Max, the moment his paws hit solid ground, bolted. He didn't go to the bush. He didn't go to drink water. He went straight under the house, to the same hardwood piling. He started digging again, with more urgency than before, whining loudly. Marcus dropped the bag of rice on the porch and looked down. The old man's warning echoed in his mind. The foreigner thought he could see everything. Marcus walked down the stairs, his hand instinctively going to his waist, where his machete rested. "What is it, Max?" he whispered to the growing darkness under the house. "What are you trying to tell me?" The wind shifted, the smell of heavy rain, the kind of storm that washes the soul and drowns the earth, came in on the breeze. The sky turned black in minutes. The storm was coming, and with it, the chance for Max to finally reveal what was buried in the mud. Marcus didn't know it yet, but this would be the last night of doubt. The morning would bring certainty. The storm didn't arrive in waves. It fell like a judgment. The sky, already bruised purple at twilight, tore open into a solid wall of water. In the Amazon, rain has weight. It hammered the corrugated tin roof of the shack with the violence of hail, a constant, deafening roar that drowned out rational thought. To Marcus, that noise was a trigger. The relentless drumming on the metal sounded dangerously like the static of a comms headset in a hot zone, or the background hiss of a battlefield before the first shot cracks. He sat on the only chair in the shack, cleaning his rusted 12-gauge pump-action shotgun by the stark beam of an LED lantern. The harsh white light threw long, jagged shadows against the bare wooden walls. His right hand had stopped trembling, steadied by the mechanical familiarity of stripping and reassembling a weapon. But his mind was at condition yellow, scanning the perimeter through the gaps in the siding. Outside, the world had vanished. There was only water and darkness, but the danger wasn't outside. Max was agitated. The German shepherd, usually a monument of stoic calm, was pacing tight circles in the center of the room. His nails clicked against the floorboards in a frantic rhythm. Click, click, click. He wasn't looking at the door. He wasn't checking the windows. The dog's focus was entirely downward. The animal stopped over the central plank, the one sitting directly above the hardwood piling he had dug at in the mud days earlier. Max began to whine. It wasn't a cry of fear. It was a high-priority alert. He scratched the wood. First slowly, then with force, his thick claws gouging splinters from the old floor. Marcus stopped cleaning the gun. He watched his partner. He knew that behavior. Max did that when he found narcotics hidden in door panels or explosives buried in tunnels. The dog was signaling a void, a hidden chamber. "Leave it, Max," Marcus commanded, his voice firm but low, almost swallowed by the roar of the rain. The dog obeyed reluctantly, backing off 2 steps, but keeping his amber eyes locked on the wood, his body coiled like a spring. Marcus knelt. He placed his hand on the plank. He felt a slight vibration. Maybe it was just the storm shaking the fragile stilt house, or maybe it was a draft coming from a space that shouldn't exist. He grabbed the pry bar he had used to fix the roof. If the old shopkeeper was right, if the previous foreigner wrote down schedules and watched the river, he wouldn't keep his secrets in the attic. He'd keep them in the foundation. Marcus wedged the tip of the iron bar into the seam of the floorboards. The wood groaned, a dry sound of protest. He leaned into the leverage. With a loud crack, the rusted nails gave way. He ripped up the first board, then the second. The smell hit him instantly. It wasn't the scent of wet earth or dead animals. It was chemical, sterile, the smell of rubber and silica gel, the scent of preserved gear. Marcus aimed the flashlight into the hole he'd opened in the floor. There, nesting on top of the main piling, which had been hollowed out and reinforced with a welded metal box, sat a rigid, black, waterproof, crush-proof case. A Pelican case. The kind used to transport sensitive military hardware. Marcus's heart beat in a heavy, measured rhythm. He wasn't renovating a house anymore. He was conducting a search and seizure. He hauled the heavy case up. He set it on the table, pushing the shotgun parts aside. Max approached, sniffed the box, and sat down next to it, his tail giving a single thump on the floor. "Job done, boss." Marcus popped the side latches. The vacuum seal hissed as it released pressurized air. Inside, nestled in high-density foam, there was no gold, no cocaine. There was technology. It was a high-frequency HF transceiver, military spec, ruggedized and compact. Next to it, a long-life battery pack and a waterproof hardcover logbook, the kind used by field geologists or forward observers. Marcus ran his hand over the radio. It was powered down, but connected to a coaxial cable that ran down through the bottom of the false box, likely leading to a dipole antenna, camouflaged in some tall tree outside that Marcus hadn't spotted yet. This rig had the range to talk to aircraft or boats hundreds of miles away. He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with methodical, almost mechanical handwriting, columns of dates, times, river water levels, and codes. Drop Alpha, 0200 hours, confirmed. Flight Bravo, aborted, fog. And then, on the inside cover of the notebook, written in red permanent marker, was the key to the mystery. A standard operating frequency for that station, 14,970 Mars. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the rain outside. He looked at the crumpled deed he had left on the workbench. Sale price, 497. It wasn't a price, it was an instruction. The previous owner didn't sell the land for $1,400. He sold Station 1497. He passed the asset along, or was forced to, using the value as a code for whoever was monitoring the local bureaucracy. The gravity of the situation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He hadn't bought a sanctuary. He was sitting inside an active control tower for international narcotics trafficking or illegal mining. This shack was a beacon in the dark Amazon, and by clearing the brush, by fixing the roof, by simply being there, he might have signaled to anyone listening that Station 1497 was online again. A new sound cut through the noise of the storm. Max jumped up, hackles raised, and let out a deep, visceral growl, facing the window that looked out over the river. Marcus killed the flashlight instantly, plunging the shack into total darkness. Through the roar of the storm, he heard it. Not thunder. The low, rhythmic thrum of powerful engines fighting the current. Expensive engines. The old man's warning echoed in his mind. If they stop... They were stopping. The engine pitch dropped. A spotlight beam swept the treetops and slashed across the shack's window, illuminating Marcus's face and the scar on his neck for a split second. Marcus grabbed a 12-gauge shell and racked it into the chamber of the shotgun. Clack, clack. The sound was mechanical and final. Max positioned himself by Marcus's left leg, silent and lethal. They didn't come to negotiate for the land. They came to check the radio. And Marcus knew, with the cold certainty of a man who has seen death up close, that they wouldn't leave witnesses. The storm outside was dangerous, but the storm that just docked at his mudbank was deadly. The sound of the engines outside wasn't just mechanical noise. It was a violent intrusion into the reality Marcus was trying to build. 2 outboard motors, 4 strokes, running at low RPM to minimize the acoustic signature, but the water carried the sound like an electric conductor. To the captain's trained ear, the noise told a complete story before he even saw a thing. High horsepower Yamahas, fiberglass hulls slapping against the current. These weren't locals coming back from fishing. Locals use loud, 2-stroke longtails and ride the middle of the channel. These boats were cutting the bank, hugging the vegetation to stay off radar and out of sight. They were professionals. Marcus took a deep breath, pulling the damp, moldy air of the shack into his lungs, holding it for 4 seconds and releasing it slowly through his nose. Box breathing. Ideally, he would have 4 seconds to exhale, but the situation was accelerating. The tremor in his right hand threatened to return, an electrical misfire in his ulnar nerve that always spiked when adrenaline flooded his system. He clenched his fist around the polymer forend of the 12-gauge and forced his body to comply. Not now. You aren't a cripple today. Today, you are an operator. He looked at Max. In the darkness, the German shepherd was just a silhouette of coiled muscle tension. The dog was in a sphinx position, down, front paws extended, head up, blocking the hallway that led to the front door. Max wasn't growling anymore. The time for warnings had passed. Now was the time to hunt. The animal smelled the chemical shift in Marcus's sweat, the sour scent of cortisol mixed with cold resolve. They didn't need verbal commands. A soft snap of fingers, almost inaudible under the roar of the rain on the tin roof, was enough. Max turned his head. Marcus pointed 2 fingers toward the dark corner where the makeshift kitchen stood, a blind spot for anyone looking in from the outside. The dog slid into the shadows without his nails making a single sound on the wood. Gray ghost. Marcus knew the shack. His shelter against the sun and rain had just become a wooden coffin. If they had thermal optics or simply decided to spray the thin walls with automatic fire, he was dead. He needed to move. He needed to turn the terrain's disadvantage into a weapon. He crawled to the hole he had pried open in the floorboards minutes earlier, where he had found the radio and the secret of 1497 Mars. The smell of wet earth and rot rose from it like breath from the mouth of hell. It was his escape route. Sliding legs first, he dropped into the cold, viscous mud underneath the stilt house. The rainwater was already pooling there, mixing with the trash accumulated over decades. Marcus laid on his back in the muck, hugging the shotgun to his chest, careful not to plug the barrel with dirt. He was now part of the house's foundation. Through the gaps in the floorboards above him, he could see the ceiling of the shack. Through the open sides of the stilts, he had a restricted view, at ankle height, of anyone approaching. A beam of light sliced through the darkness. Powerful. Tactical LED, blue-white. The light swept the porch, illuminating the rain falling like silver needles. Off. I saw a light, but it's off now. A male voice, raspy, spoke low but close enough to be heard. Border accent, maybe a mix of Portuguese and Spanish. Watch the bank. The boss said the signal hit here. Frequency 1497. Someone turned that shit on. Marcus counted the shadows. One pair of heavy black tactical boots stepped into the mud 3 yards from his position. Then another pair, green rubber swamp boots, lighter tread. 2 men on point. Likely 1 or 2 more in the boat, running perimeter security and piloting. 4 hostiles total. He had 5 shells in the shotgun and a machete on his belt. The math wasn't favorable, but surprise was a force multiplier. The man in the tactical boots climbed the first step of the porch stairs. The old wood groaned. "Oye, anybody home?" The voice was arrogant, the voice of someone used to finding terrified locals or lost tourists. No answer, just the sound of the storm punishing the jungle. Marcus watched from below, motionless as a fallen log. The cold mud seeped into his clothes, sticking to the scar on his shoulder, but he ignored the discomfort. He was analyzing the gear. The man on the stairs carried a short-barreled rifle, slung on a single-point sling. By the silhouette, it looked like an AR platform. Heavy firepower for the bush. That confirmed it. These weren't chicken thieves. This was the security detail for a logistics corridor. The second man, the one in rubber boots, stayed down, shining his light into the windows. He was dangerously close to where Marcus lay. If he lowered that light 30 degrees, he would shine it right into the captain's eyes. Marcus held his breath. His heart beat in a slow, heavy rhythm, a hydraulic pump pushing oxygenated blood to his muscles. Thump, thump, thump. He calculated the distance. 6 feet. If the man saw him, Marcus would have to fire. A 12-gauge slug at that range would take the guy's leg off, but it would reveal his position, and the man up top with the rifle would turn the floorboards into Swiss cheese, killing Marcus and Max inside. No. Shooting was the last resort. The man below lit a cigarette, cupping the flame with his hand. The smell of cheap tobacco drifted to Marcus, mixing with the ozone of the rain. The glow of the ember illuminated the enemy's face for a second. Young, scar on the chin, nervous eyes. He didn't want to be out here in this rain. That was an advantage. Uncomfortable enemies make mistakes. Up top, the man in tactical boots kicked the front door. The rotten wood gave way with a dry crash. "Police! Hands on your head!" he shouted. It was a common tactic. Shout "police" to confuse the victim, make them hesitate. But Marcus knew real police don't operate like that. Not out here. Not at this hour. The man entered. Heavy footsteps echoed on the floorboards above Marcus's head. Dust and sawdust drifted into his eyes, but he didn't blink. He tracked the sound of the boots. The intruder was in the center of the room. He was walking toward the kitchen, toward Max. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Max was trained to engage on command or direct aggression. If the man shined his light into the kitchen corner and saw the dog, he would shoot. And Max, fast as he was, wasn't bulletproof. "Clear at the entrance," the man up top shouted. "Hammock is rigged. There's food. Coffee is warm. Someone's here, Slick. The animal is in the den." The man down below, Slick, tossed his cigarette into the mud. "Find the radio. Boss wants the radio." "I'm looking. Wait, what the hell is this?" Upstairs, the flashlight beam must have found the hole in the floor, the hole Marcus had dropped through. The intruder stepped closer to the opening. Marcus saw the flashlight beam leak through the cracks above him, getting brighter. The man was going to look down the hole. He was going to see Marcus lying in the mud, staring back up at him. Stealth was over. Marcus prepped the trigger. If the man's face appeared in the hole, he would fire upwards, through the floor. The light intensified. Marcus tensed his leg muscles, preparing to roll. Suddenly, a sound from the kitchen. It wasn't a bark. It was a deliberate noise. The sound of a metal pot being knocked onto the floor. Clang. Max. The intelligent dog, the veteran of canine warfare, didn't attack. He created a distraction. He pulled focus. "Hear that? He's in the kitchen," the man upstairs shouted, pivoting on his heels and moving away from the hole, running toward the back of the house. "Get him! Don't shoot if you don't have to. We need to interrogate." Slick shouted from down below, running up the stairs to join his partner. Marcus saw the opening. The man below abandoned his watch position and went up the stairs. Now, both hostiles were inside the house. Marcus and Max were separated, but the dynamic had flipped. The enemy was contained in a confined, loud, dark space, thinking they were hunting a cornered man. But the man wasn't in the house. The man was underneath it, free, armed, and angry. Marcus rolled out of the mud, clearing the stilt structure. The rain washed the muck from his face instantly. He stood up, water streaming off his body, shotgun glued to his shoulder. He didn't go up the stairs. That was a fatal funnel. They would be expecting someone at the door. He flanked the house, moving with silent steps in the soft mud, until he reached the back window, the one leading to the kitchen. The window he knew had a broken latch. Inside, chaos reigned. "Where is he? I heard it right here." The rifleman was sweeping the kitchen with his light. Max wasn't there. The dog had knocked the pot over and retreated into the shadows, using the old furniture as cover, circling silently to flank the intruders. He was applying the bite and move maneuver Marcus had taught him years ago. Marcus pressed his back against the outer wall under the window. He could hear the ragged breathing of the men inside. "Nobody here, damn it. Did he go out the back? Check under the table." Marcus knew he had about 10 seconds before they calmed down and started thinking logically. He needed to equalize the odds. He pulled a device from his pocket, an improvised flashbang he had rigged days earlier, using gunpowder from old shells, magnesium scrapings from a fire starter, and a soda can sealed with electrical tape and a short fuse. It wasn't military-grade ordnance. It wouldn't kill anyone. But in a dark, enclosed room, the flash and overpressure would be enough to blind and disorient anyone, even pros. He struck the waterproof match, shielding it from the rain with his body. The smell of burning sulfur filled his nostrils, a nostalgic and terrible perfume. The fuse hissed. 1, 2, 3. Marcus stood up and tossed the can through the open window into the kitchen. "Grenade!" Someone screamed inside, too late. Boom! The blast was muffled, but the white flash leaked through the windows and cracks of the shack like lightning born indoors. Screams of pain and surprise. The sound of a rifle firing blindly in a reflex reaction. Bullets tearing through the tin roof. Go. Marcus didn't enter through the window. He sprinted to the front of the house, took the stairs 3 at a time, and kicked the already broken door wide open. He entered the room like a storm. The smoke from the homemade powder hung in the air, acrid and thick. The two men were in the kitchen, coughing, rubbing their eyes, their flashlights pointing chaotically at the floor. "Max! Fass!" Marcus shouted the attack command in German, the language the dog learned in the K9 Academy. From the shadows, the gray shape materialized. Max didn't bark. He launched himself into the air, 80 pounds of muscle and teeth, and hit the rifleman in the chest, knocking him down with a heavy thud. The man screamed as the shepherd's jaws clamped onto the arm holding the weapon, applying enough pressure to crush bone, but not letting go. The second man, Slick, tried to spin, reaching for the holster on his belt. He was still blinking, blinded by the flash. Marcus was 6 feet away. He didn't shoot. Ammo is precious, and shots attract the others in the boat. Marcus surged forward and used the butt of the shotgun. A short, brutal, precise stroke to the intruder's solar plexus. The air left the man's lungs with the sound of a deflating tire. Before he could fall, Marcus pivoted the weapon and delivered a second strike to the temple. Lights out. The rifleman on the floor was trying to punch Max, but the dog was in lock mode. He shook his head, using his body weight to keep the man pinned, growling that terrible sound that comes from deep in the chest. "Aus!" Marcus commanded. Release. Max obeyed instantly, letting go of the bloody arm, but staying on top of him, growling inches from the intruder's face, teeth bared, saliva dripping onto the mercenary's tactical vest. The man on the floor looked at the dog, then looked up at the silhouette of Marcus, backlit by the lightning outside, holding the 12-gauge pointed at his head. "Who the hell are you?" the intruder asked, his voice shaking with pain and shock. Marcus stepped closer. He kicked the rifle away. He crouched down, eye to eye with the man. His dark eyes held no anger, no fear. Just the cold void of a man who has done this 1,000 times. "I'm the new landlord," Marcus whispered, "and the rent is due." Silence returned to the shack, broken only by the rain and the whimpers of the wounded man. 2 down, but there was still the boat, and whoever was out there now knew that their recon mission had turned into a rescue mission, or an extermination. Marcus looked at Max. The dog licked his lips, tasting the enemy's blood, and looked at the door. Round 1 was theirs, but the night was far from over. The silence that followed the violence wasn't empty. It was heavy, ringing in Marcus's ears with the persistence of tinnitus caused by the concussion of the improvised grenade in a closed room. The adrenaline, that chemical fuel that had kept him fast and lethal during the breach, was starting to drain from his system, leaving behind the bitter residue of physical pain. The scar on his neck throbbed, an inflammatory response to the sudden exertion of the butt strokes, and the tremor in his right hand returned, subtle but present, vibrating against the cold steel of the shotgun. But the captain's mind was armored. He shoved the pain into a locked compartment at the back of his consciousness. There was no time to bleed, and certainly no time to feel. On the kitchen floor, the 2 intruders were neutralized, but alive. The man Marcus had struck, Slick, was breathing raggedly, unconscious, his chest rising and falling in irregular spasms. The other one, the rifleman whose arm Max had turned into a pulp of meat and tactical fabric, was slumped against the wall, pale, eyes wide with terror, cradling his mangled limb. He wasn't looking at Marcus. He was staring at Max. The German shepherd hadn't relaxed. Max had assumed the guard position, sitting rigidly between the prisoners and the exit, ears pinned back against his skull, teeth bared in a silent, continuous snarl. A drop of the intruder's blood dripped from the dog's muzzle onto the floorboards, but Max didn't lick it. He was working. To the dog, these men were no longer active threats, but objects under custody. Any sudden movement would result in a fresh bite. The animal's discipline was absolute, a living reflection of the training both man and dog had received in the kennels of special operations. Marcus moved with methodical efficiency. He used heavy-duty plastic zip ties, bought to secure water pipes, to bind the men's wrists and ankles. While patting down the conscious mercenary, his calloused hands found what he was looking for: a handheld tactical radio clipped to the vest and a laminated card with call signs. The handheld radio hissed. A voice crackled from the small speaker, cutting through the gloom of the shack. "Ground team, respond. Slick, Viper, sitrep. Do you copy? Over." The voice came from the boat. It was impatient, authoritative. The man against the wall made a move to answer, maybe to scream for help, maybe to beg for mercy. Marcus didn't speak. He simply pressed his index finger to his lips, the universal sign for silence, and then pointed at Max. The dog took one step forward, the growl increasing in volume, vibrating in his chest, like an engine revving to redline. The prisoner understood. He swallowed his scream and closed his eyes, defeated. The fear of the beast was greater than his loyalty to the boss outside. Marcus took the handheld, but he didn't answer. He had a better plan. A plan that would use their own arrogance against them. He walked to the main room, where the black Pelican case was still open on the table, lit only by the flashes of lightning filtering through the cracks in the walls. He looked at the military hardware he had discovered. The HF transceiver, tuned to 14970 MHz. This wasn't a ham radio setup. This rig had the power to sweep the spectrum, basic encryption, and continental range. It was the voice of this trafficking route. And now, Marcus owned the voice. He connected the battery pack. The digital display lit up with a ghostly green glow. Marcus put on the headset. He wasn't going to scream. He wasn't going to threaten. In the theater of psychological warfare, what you don't say is more terrifying than what you do. He knew the men on the boat were nervous. They had heard the pop of the flashbang, seen the lights flicker, and now the radio silence was corroding their confidence. They were blind in the rain, waiting for a sign of life that wasn't coming. Marcus set the frequency to the tactical channel he saw on the prisoner's handheld, bridging the base station with their portable comms. He took a deep breath, modulating his voice. He didn't use the aggressive tone of a cop in a chase. He used the cold, clinical, bureaucratic tone of a cleaner, the kind of a lead operator sent to sanitize a site. He keyed the mic. "Central Command to River Unit Beta. Code Black. I repeat, Code Black at Station 1497. The sector is compromised. Federal intercept in progress." He released the button and waited. The sound of the rain on the roof seemed to lessen, or maybe it was just Marcus's hearing focusing entirely on the response. The radio crackled almost immediately. The voice from the boat, previously arrogant, now sounded confused and alarmed. "Who is this? Identify. Where is Viper? What happened to the ground team?" Marcus smiled, a humorless expression that didn't reach his eyes. They took the bait. They didn't know who was in the house. It could be the feds, it could be the military, or worse, a rival cartel taking the point. Confusion is the mother of error. Marcus transmitted again, whispering now, as if hiding his position inside the shack. "This is Operator Sierra 1. Targets neutralized. The perimeter is mined. You have laser designators painting your hull at this moment. If you engage those engines to approach, you will be vaporized. Standing orders are no loose ends." It was a monumental bluff. Marcus had an old shotgun and 5 shells. There were no mines, no lasers, no support team. There was just a tired man, a wounded dog, and the darkness of the jungle. But the men on the boat couldn't see through the wooden walls. All they knew was that their 2 best hitters had entered that house and vanished into absolute silence. And now, an unknown voice, using precise military terminology, was telling them they were in the crosshairs. Marcus crawled to the front window and peeked through a crack in the rotten wood. Down on the river, chaos had set in. The boat's spotlight, which had been sweeping the house with confidence, cut out abruptly. They were trying to go dark. Marcus saw the dark silhouette of the vessel spinning in the current. They were arguing. He could hear muffled shouting over the water. Fear was doing the work. Bullets couldn't. "Bullshit!" the voice on the radio screamed, trying to regain control, but the tremor in the tone betrayed panic. "If it was feds, you'd have speedboats. Who are you? Show your face." Their leader was smart. He was suspicious. Marcus needed a final act to sell the lie. He needed special effects. He looked at the 12 gauge in his hand. There was one flare cartridge left in the box of ammo he'd bought at the village, standard issue for river survival. He racked the slide, ejecting the lethal slug and loading the red flare. He went to the back door, cracked it open, and aimed high at an angle that would arc the projectile over the treetops and down toward the river, but far enough away not to illuminate his own position. He pulled the trigger. Thump! The sound was hollow, but the streak of red light cut through the rain like a meteor of blood. The flare hissed as it climbed, then popped in the sky, bathing the river and the boat in a crimson, sinister, flickering light. Marcus jumped back on the radio immediately, shouting now, simulating the urgency of a forward air controller giving a fire command. "Air support. Visual confirmed. Mark the target on the red light. You are cleared hot. I repeat, cleared hot on the vessel." That was the breaking point. The sight of the red flare descending over them, combined with the threat of an airstrike. However unlikely in that storm, the terrified mind of a criminal doesn't stop to analyze logistics. Shattered the chain of command on the boat. The boat's engine roared, not in idle but full throttle. Water churned at the stern as the pilots slammed the lever forward, spinning the craft violently. They weren't attacking. They were running. They were fleeing from the death coming from the sky, the phantom air support Marcus had conjured. Marcus watched through the crack as the boat's navigation lights disappeared around the river bend, swallowed by the rain and the night. The sound of the engines faded into a distant buzz, and finally, silence. He exhaled the air trapped in his lungs and slid down the wall until he hit the floor. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now, the shotgun clattering against the wood. The bluff had worked. But for how long? They would return. Maybe not tonight, but they would come back with more men when they realized there was no airstrike. Or maybe their bosses, realizing they lost Station 1497, would send something worse than hired guns. Max broke his guard and trotted over to Marcus. The dog sniffed his handler's face, licking the cold sweat and gunpowder soot. Marcus wrapped his arm around the animal's thick neck, burying his face in the damp fur that smelled of rain and wet dog. That smell was the only real thing in the world right now. "They're gone, buddy," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. "But we just started a big war." He looked at the military radio on the table, glowing with its green light. He had won the battle of the night, but he had just declared war on the cartel. The shack was no longer a refuge. It was a trench. And he, the retired captain who just wanted to forget the war, now had a new mission. Hold the line. Not for orders, not for a paycheck, but because this was his land, and no one, not hell, not the devil, was taking him out of here alive. The retreat of the mercenary boat left a vacuum of sound that was soon filled by the steady dripping of the rain, losing its strength. The storm, which hours ago seemed bent on wiping the shack off the map, had softened into a cold, thin mist, the exhausted sigh of the tropical atmosphere. Inside the stilt house, the air was thick. The smell of human sweat, burnt gunpowder, and the copper tang of fresh blood composed the olfactory landscape of a contained war zone. Marcus rose from the floor with slow, mechanical movements. His joints popped. The crash that hits a 46-year-old man after an adrenaline spike is brutal as if the blood in his veins has been replaced by liquid lead. But the work wasn't finished. A soldier knows that winning the firefight is just phase 1. Survival depends on what you do with the battlefield after the shooting stops. He walked to the kitchen, his flashlight on low-intensity mode illuminating the floor. The 2 intruders were still there, bound with the industrial zip ties. The man named Slick was moaning softly, the concussion keeping him in a state of murky semi-consciousness. The other one, the rifleman, was shaking uncontrollably. He was going into shock, pale, breath shallow. The arm punctured by Max's canines was swollen, the sleeve of his tactical shirt darkened with blood, though the major bleeding had stopped. Marcus didn't feel hate for them. Hate is a passionate emotion, a luxury that clouds judgment. To him, these men were just gears in the same machine that destroyed lives in the cities and was now trying to consume the forest. They were broken tools. He knelt and applied a tactical tourniquet and an Israeli pressure dressing, part of his personal trauma kit, to the wounded man's arm. Not out of compassion, but out of pragmatism. A dead prisoner attracts the homicide squad. A living prisoner attracts federal intelligence. And Marcus needed the feds. He dragged both men underneath the house, into the same mud pit he had emerged from, and tied them to the base of the hardwood pilings. They were secure, but immobilized. Their night would be long and cold. When he returned to the interior of the shack, his attention finally turned to his partner. Max was lying in the center of the room, panting. Marcus sat beside the dog and began the tactical check, a ritual they had repeated since their days in the teams. He ran his skilled hands over the shepherd's body, palpating the chest, checking the ribs, moving down the legs. Max whined softly when Marcus touched his right rear leg, the site of the old shrapnel injury. The dog had strained the joint in the jump, but nothing was broken. Marcus wiped the dried blood from the dog's muzzle with a damp cloth. He held the animal's face in both hands. Max looked back with those deep amber eyes, intelligent and unshakable. "Good boy," Marcus whispered, his voice heavy with a gratitude he couldn't express to humans. "House is clear. Rest." The dog sighed heavily and rested his head on Marcus's lap, his body heat serving as the best sedative the ex-SEAL could ask for. Marcus didn't sleep, but he closed his eyes, keeping one hand on the shotgun and the other on the dog's neck, waiting for the darkness to yield. When the sun finally tore through the horizon, the transformation of the jungle was absolute. The golden light of the Amazon morning invaded the cracks of the shack. Mist rose from the brown river like the breath of a sleeping dragon, and the heat began to evaporate the night's moisture, creating a natural greenhouse. The beauty of the landscape was indifferent to the violence of the previous night. The jungle doesn't mourn. With daylight, Marcus initiated phase 2 of his plan. The disposal. He grabbed the HF transceiver tuned to 1497 MHz that he'd found in the Foundation. That gear couldn't stay there. If the cartel bosses used signal triangulation, they would pinpoint the house. But the radio was also the key to his ghost alibi. Marcus tuned into an open emergency frequency he knew was monitored by river patrols and federal police forward bases in the region. He wasn't going to identify himself. He would be the anonymous tip that burned the site. He keyed the PTT. His voice came out altered, professional. "Attention, River Command. This is a hunter on the west bank of the Negro tributary. Approximate grid Delta 3. 2 individuals armed with rifles have been immobilized. Suspicious narcotics activity. Comms equipment intercepted on frequency 14.970. Marcus paused, calculating. "The trash is tied up on the bank. Come pick it up." He killed the power immediately, ripped out the battery, and submerged the radio in a bucket of water, frying the circuits to prevent any future tracking. He hid the logbook, the notebook containing the crime routes inside the thermal lining of his rucksack. That book was his insurance policy and his map. Next, he and Max marched the two prisoners to the riverbank, right at the edge of his property, where the vegetation met the muddy water. Marcus tied the men to a thick kapok tree, visible to any official boat that passed. They were gagged, but alive. The tactical genius of that morning was simple. When the federal police found those men and discovered the 1497 frequency, they would launch a federal sweep of the region. The cartel, in turn, would assume the night raid. The Phantom helicopter, the Red Flare, had been a police sting operation from the start. Marcus would become invisible. The shack would just be a point of conflict between two great forces. He was the ghost who pushed the pieces and walked off the board. The sun was high when Marcus returned to his porch. The front door was in splinters, breached by the invader's boot. The floor was torn up, exposing the mud beneath. The smell of gunpowder still impregnated the old wood. To anyone else, this would be a nightmare scene, proof that moving here was a colossal mistake. But looking at the destruction, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. For 2 years he had wandered the States, a shadow of himself. He thought he needed silence. He thought he needed to hide from the world. He was wrong. Warriors like him aren't made for rest. They aren't made for passive peace. They rot in silence. They need a mission. They need a border to hold. He hadn't just bought an old shack for 1497. He had purchased the most dangerous outpost in the region. This point on the river was a choke point for crime, a place where the darkness of the modern world tried to violate the raw nature. And now, that post had a sentinel. Marcus grabbed a hammer and a saw. He walked to the broken door. The tremor in his right hand was completely gone. His mind was clear, his focus sharp as the edge of his machete. He would fix the door. He would reinforce the walls. He would camouflage the house. He would train in the bush. Would they come back? Maybe. Would the jungle throw new challenges at him? Definitely. Max walked out from the house, limping slightly after the rest, but with his tail high. The dog lay down in a patch of sunlight on the porch, eyes half closed, but ears still tuned to the symphony of the jungle. He was home. The rain had washed away the filth, but the forest still kept its secrets. The Amazon River flowed on, deep and dark, indifferent to the battles of men. But from this day forward, anyone navigating these waters would need to be careful. The price of 1497 was no longer a code for criminals. Now, it was the cost of the toll for this stretch of river, and the collector didn't take bribes.